Mario Paz. Thank you for coming this morning. Candidate for California Senate in District 33 here in California, and you're running against Lena Gonzalez.
Yes.
So we'll just start with a very informal interview, just talking a little bit about your background and your family. I see that you used to live in Norwalk and you're now in Long Beach.
Correct.
Okay. How long have you been there?
So Long Beach, I've lived in Long Beach from 2005 and then moved to moved to Long Beach in 2000, moved out to Irvine in 2005, stayed there for 10 years, and then moved back to Long Beach in 2015.
Okay.
Before
so always in the area.
Always in the area. And then before that, I was in Norwalk, which is part of the South Bay community, which is Long Beach, and lived in Norwalk for about 30 years. Grew up there.
Got it. And I see that you've been a CPA for a very long time.
Yes.
And in light of California's recent budget issues, it seems like that could be a handy profession in the legislature right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 plus years, and when you get down to budgeting, you have to get in there and kind of look at what you really need and what you don't need, and eliminating the waste, and at the same time, making the hard decisions on what can you cut and what you can do. And so it's something I'm very familiar with. Probably the last 5 companies I've worked with, been heavily involved with the forecasting and budgeting.
Yeah, and I would say in general, a lot of Americans, and myself included, we would like to see a few more business people in government to try to run things a little bit more like a business and go through all the line items. I know that's a really big thing, especially with the federal campaigns right now too.
Exactly. I mean, you have so much waste, and at the same time, you look at where the money's going, and you look at, for instance, veterans. Veterans are, a lot of the homeless that we have issues is veterans, and you look at that, and we have illegals coming in, and that money is getting diverted to the illegals instead of taking care of the veterans. I mean, if you serve for our country, the least we can do is take care of you when you get back, and when you're in hard times, because you were there for us. You were fighting for our country during those hard times for us as a country.
Agreed. And so then, when did you decide to get involved in politics? Because you don't strike me to be a career politician, so I'm wondering what inspired you to run, or when you first got involved.
So you're absolutely right. This is my first time running for office. I've never done this before. What happened was back in COVID, when I was thinking about COVID, you look at COVID and all the mandates that were coming down, and it just scared the crap out of me that the government can put mandates on individuals for vaccines when you don't have a free choice. And so that kind of triggered an event in my family. My wife got involved in the Long Beach Parents United, and it was a group that was not anti-vaccine, it was more anti-mandate. So if you choose not to get the vaccine, that's fine. If you choose to get the vaccine, it's fine. It's basically your choice, individual choice of what you know what's best for your body. And that kind of started at that point. I kind of got in, starting to pay attention more, waking up and seeing all of this repeat of the Mockingbird media repeating, oh, the COVID. And that kind of triggered, hey, I need to get involved.
Sure. I think a lot of people had that same sentiment, and now we've seen that a lot of the information they put out about COVID ended up not being correct, and some of it appears to have been deliberately deceiving.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't know what the intention was. If it was to see how far we could push society, and they got a gauge. And that's the scary part, is they know what they can do. And when I say they, I'm referring to the government and everybody in there that's possibly looking nefariously at what they can force individuals to do and control them.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, freedom is the most important, and your right to choose is the most important, and your children are important as well.
Sure, got it. Okay, so let's get a little bit into the issues, and the way that I like to do it is I go through the candidate's website and any other material that I can find and cover the things that appear to be most important to you first, and then if there's things that I wasn't able to find on certain issues, then we'll go through those. So on your website, as I would expect from a CPA, you focused heavily on a lot of numbers, and specifically the $73.5 billion budget deficit was very high up on the list. And you also say things like, we have the highest poverty rate, we have the highest gas tax, we have the highest income tax in the country. And And then you also go on to talk a little bit about how we're spending an estimated $33 billion a year on the homeless problem,
Right.
and it doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere. So do you want to talk a little bit about how California can try to handle the homeless problem differently, or where we should be focusing our money instead of that and to fix the budget deficit?
So when I think about the homeless problem, as I mentioned, the veterans, I absolutely need to be taken care of by the state and the federal government. But when I look at the other issue, we look at the drug problem, and there's a heavy drug problem that's causing the homelessness. And what we need is to focus, take the money that we have on our sin taxes for alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, take that money and focus more on rehabilitation, use that tax money on rehabilitation facilities so that they have access to get off of their vices that they have. And you can't go in there and tell somebody to get off of their drugs. They have to come to it on their own. So when I look at the homelessness, it's more of an addiction problem. That's what I look at. At the same time, I go back to our founding, and ultimately all these issues, they were never involved with the government. And when the government gets involved, it seems to be a big waste. We had churches and communities that came together and took care of the homeless, or helped the hungry get food. And that's something that I would like to go back to, and encouraging those organizations to get, maybe looking at that and seeing what we can do at a community level to help the homelessness.
Yeah, so I had interviewed Mike Greer, who was a candidate for California Assembly in the 2nd District, I believe. And his big thing was that we're giving all of these billions of dollars to nonprofit organizations in an attempt to solve this problem, but there were no measurable outcomes. And so they seem to just be money sinks. For example, I'm up in the Bay Area, and there's needle exchange programs. So they give money to nonprofits to hand out clean needles, but all that seems to do is increase the number of needles on the street. So when you're talking about rehabilitation, what sorts of programs do you think we should shift that money into? Because giving them free housing, most voters don't seem to agree with that, because they're just going to ruin the housing.
I agree.
So what sorts of rehab programs when you're referring to that?
So this would be, facilities. If we have a pot dispensary, we have kind of a addiction facility next to it where if you want to go in there, because at the end of the day, the addicts go in and they don't feel good, and when they walk up, they're like, oh, I could go to that facility. And more of directing our money at medical, or like the AA communities, Alcoholics Anonymous, and kind of those type of facilities. And when we look at the AA community, it's all nonprofit. They work on a very tight budget, and some of those facilities, the money that we have could be focused on documentation and videos and more of the development, so they know what's going on. Whereas the individuals that are involved, those nonprofits, they understand where people are coming from, and they've been there. A lot of them have been there, and they're trying to get them out of the addiction cycle. So I would prefer, when I say just redirect the money, it would be more towards the rehabilitation facilities, because that's where we're going to see the biggest win. Because at the end of the day, you want them to address their addiction, then become good citizens and start to work and everything. Because when you have an addiction, it impacts work, it impacts family, it impacts your entire life. And rehabilitation will give them back their life, give them back their family, and at the same time they're going to have work, and they're going to have worth. They're going to feel the worth of what they're doing for society.
Sure. And sticking on the drugs and criminality side of things, I do agree that most of the homeless problems in the state tend to be because of drugs. A lot of Californians might think that, it's cost of living, and so people get put out on the streets because of that, but it's usually, in most cases, that's not the case. And so I feel like we probably do need some sort of intervention, law enforcement, and that, of course, leads into other criminal areas, like the problems that have been caused by Prop 47. It was initially billed as, all of these are drug offenses, and they're nonviolent drug offenses, so let's be more lenient, but it's clearly had impacts beyond drug use. So what's your stance on Prop 47, the $950 limit obviously there's a proposition up this year
Yeah,
to try to pull
36.
that back off the books.
Yes, and so I am supporting 36 because 36 will pull back 47.
Okay.
And so I absolutely, everything, once 47 went through, and as you mentioned, all their bills sound great when they put them out there, and it's such a deception. 47 just has been impacted every community. I mean, there's a Riot Aid that used to be right around the corner from my house. It's closing because they're just, you walk in there, people walk out. They just walk out with, there's nothing they can do. So as a business and coming from small business, there's no way that you could make it in that area. You have rent, you have, and then your product's just walking out. It's impossible to succeed. And so 47 has just destroyed communities, and you'll see that with, the pharmacies that are leaving because of that. And that's an important part of people's life where they where they need medication, and they can't even go in there because guess what? We're leaving town because your rules and your community are not, respecting our business. So they pack up and leave, and that's something I see all over Long Beach, and it's concerning.
Yeah, and it appears, according to the latest polling, that Prop 36 is heavily favored by Californians. It was somewhere between 71 and 75% approval, voting yes on that, according to the polling. So it looks like that will be undone. Is this an example of where you think the legislature, which is, they call it a mega majority now in Sacramento, mega majority Democrat, meaning we're at like 80% Democrats, I think in both the Senate and the Assembly right now. Do you think this is where they've gone a little bit too far and we need to move back towards the middle? Yeah,
anybody who votes in California, if you're better off 4 years, for the last 4 years, then I would say if you're better than the last 4 years, vote for my opponent, because obviously what she's doing is helping you. But I don't know any California that sees the state going in the right direction. Actually, everybody's suffering. So we need to, change that supermajority, the mega majority. And, the only way we're going to have checks and balances is if we start to chip away at that mega majority and get in there and get a different opinion. Right now, I could look at every vote for my opponent, and she's voted directly upon party lines. So whatever they want, it's a yes or no vote. She'll vote exactly that way. And my concern is she's not even listening to her community, because AB 1955, which is parental rights, hiding what your student comes to you and talks to a teacher and hiding that from the parents. The only person that really cares about the child is the parents. I have a son that was born at 805 grams, 1 pound, 12 ounces. I know what he can and can't take, and I know everything that's going on in his life. So that's something the teachers don't know. They don't understand, and hiding any information from the parents is just, it's unbelievable. I'm trying to think of the legal word, but it's just horrible what they're doing, because you can't do that for children, and that's when I think about our laws and everything in the mega majority, that's what we run into individuals that are voting for, my community is, my district is from Long Beach to Commerce, all the way on the 710, every city that touches the 710, east of the 710. That community is heavy Latino, and when we look at the votes in the Senate, they're voting for biological men in girls' restrooms, or girls' locker rooms. Any Latino man will tell you, no way, I do not want a man in my daughter's bathroom. But my opponent's voting yes for that. She's clearly going opposite of what her community believes, and basically her constituents believe. So.
Yeah, and do you think that's just because the average parent now is really busy, or working all the time, most of the time, both parents, and they just don't know what our current legislators are pushing through, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You're working, and some parents are working 12-hour days, 10-hour days, and they get home and they just want to eat, talk to give their kid a hug and a kiss and go to bed, and they're not really talking about what happened during the day because they're exhausted. Yeah. And that they're trying to make the best life for their child, and they're relying on what they believe. They're assuming that is everybody believes, and it's really not what's happening right now. That the education system is just really crazy. I mean, my son has a math class, and he walks into his math class, and his teacher goes, "Hey, I was at a friend's house who only has girls, and my son played with the Barbie house and everything, and it was just great." And my son looked at his classmate and goes, "What does this have to do with math?" And it's just, they're always pushing this agenda, and that's why it's concerning, because there's twofold that you were mentioning. You were mentioning the politicians are passing and the parents don't know what's happening. But at the same time, it's happening it's a two-front attack, that the teachers are doing the same thing at school. And so unless you talk with your children, you don't know. And a lot of times you don't have time because they're in high school, and it's not something they want to talk to their parents about. It's not something they feel comfortable talking about. I mean, I know when I was in high school, I didn't tell my parents what was going on in high school because it just wasn't comfortable. And these teachers know that. And so that's why it's really scary. So you have the politicians passing and the teachers hitting on both sides, and then you have parents that are just working to provide for their children, and they're good people. And unfortunately, the children are suffering.
Yeah, and I saw on your website that education was one of your top issues, and you really did focus on the fact that because you sort of write, the school districts have gone from education to the practice of diversity, inclusion, and creating division between races, and leading children into circumstances beyond their concept of understanding, that it's eroding the academic rigor in our schools, and that I believe you said in 2012, California was ranked 32nd, which wasn't great, but in just the last 12 years since then, we've dropped to 44. Was that overall education?
Overall education, yeah.
Okay, and we have some of the worst ratings in math and
all
literacy.
The STEM and literacy, STEM and literacy.
Yeah. So where do you think the schools should draw the line between? I'll just preface it with saying that when I was running for office, this issue did come up for me a lot. Parents were not happy with things being pushed in school. And my response was that I was okay with, for example, say gay rights being taught from a social studies perspective as in a historical context. And I think most parents would be okay with things like that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But at what point does it cross the line and the schools need to pull back and focus more on education?
So as long as it's in the curriculum, I'm okay with it. But when you look at police officers, as an example, I have a friend who's a police officer, and if they share any of their political views in uniform, they get terminated. So why not roll that out for anybody who's interacting with children? If you're going to show your political view with the children, you have a risk of being terminated. Guess what? I think a lot of teachers will start to focus on what the education is, because with technology and everything that's going on, you can find out which teachers are not really teaching. They're forcing a DEI. And at the end of the day, it's not I'm against teachers. It's, hey, I want my son and the children to be educated in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and be able to read and have literacy. That's what we need to focus on all the time. It's not necessarily, hey, we need to focus on this DEI. No, we don't need that right now. The best thing for someone to be successful, they need to be able to read, they need to be able to write, and they need to be able to do math. You're going to succeed in life if you could do those, because math's going to teach you problem solving. Reading and writing is going to teach you to communicate. And those are the most important things for our youth to succeed.
Sure. It sounds like you have a pretty hard stand on, you believe that schools are for academics and rigorous education, and that the social aspect of it should be left to the parents and maybe to extracurricular activities that the kids are in, sports,
exactly.
Learning how to socialize and deal with issues outside of the school.
I think that's how it's historically been. And if we could get back to that point, and at the end of the day, the kids know what's right and wrong. And that's why when you ask them a question, they give you a blunt answer, and you can't handle it sometimes. But it's just an answer that they see, and so what they're trying to do is change that and mold them into what what they think is correct.
Sure. And another bill in addition to AB 1955, you mentioned SB 1419 on your website, which was blocking parents from accessing their child's medical records and clinical notes on sensitive services, and talking about how important parental rights are when it comes to being able to access this. You want to talk a little bit
So
about that bill?
Exactly. So that bill is, for my son who was born 805 grams, no one knows that. None of the teachers know that. No one, the doctors, I don't know if it goes in his record, maybe it does now, but they don't know all the complications we've had, his allergies or anything that's going on, that we're taking care of him. And for that to be blocked, that could be life-threatening for our son. And so we had our older son, he had the vaccine, he got vaccine injured. So when it came to COVID, that was the whole thing with COVID, and this mandate on medical is, I don't want my son making that decision because he doesn't know the implications of what it's going to do to his mRNA or DNA with that shot. So those could be life-threatening, and guess what? We're seeing a lot of kids that are very young having heart attacks right now, and I don't know what changed since 2019.
Sure.
So.
Let's jump on to a little bit different topic. It was something that came up briefly, illegal immigration, and specifically in the state of California, there was legislation passed that is making California voters pay for the health insurance for illegal immigrants to the tune of at least $3 billion per year. There was legislation that made it all the way to Gavin Newsom's desk, those passed through the Assembly and the Senate, that would have allowed illegal immigrants to become part of the program where they could receive up to $250,000 for a down payment on a home.
Yes.
What's your stance in general on illegal immigration and how the California legislature should handle these issues?
So I want to talk about the 150,000 after, but just in case I forget, please remind me.
Sure, I'll remind you.
So as far as illegal immigration, so my grandfather was an immigrant, came here, went through the legal process. My wife came here, went through the process, is legal.
And what is your heritage? Because your last name is Paz, and Mario Paz, so it would seem like it could be Hispanic, but it
Yes.
could also be Italian.
Well, my grandparents came from Puerto Rico, and they came into Ellis Island, and so it's pretty cool. If you go to Ellis Island, you could see all of the boat they came on, the paperwork. It's pretty cool that they have that website. And then my father was born in New York, moved to Compton, went to Compton High. My mother.
So you were raised to be tough. At
Well,
least he was.
Yes, he was. Yeah. Well, we grew up in Norwalk too, which is the heavy Latino community. So
Sure.
then my mom's Irish, Scottish, English. So that's where I get my fairness from.
Got it.
And she grew up in Southgate. So all of these communities. I was born in Lynwood. All these communities that I'm running, this is all they're all linked together. Coming back home, and my father. Met my mother. She went to St. Mary's Academy, and my grandfather was not happy about it. He said, "You cannot marry that man." And then my mom goes, "Well, he's Mexican," and she goes, "No, he's Puerto Rican." And my grandfather goes, "That's even worse."
Oh no.
So it was.
Okay, so you definitely have an immigrant background,
Yes.
but legal immigration process.
Yes,
through
everything
Ellis
went through the legal immigration process. And my father-in-law, he came here from Turkey as a professor at Cal State Long Beach in engineering, and then my wife came with him. So she's pretty much American, more so than she's
Sure.
she assimilated very well, and so we see the success when you go through the legal immigration process. And so I'm adamant supporter of that. Now, regarding the illegal immigration, the rules on the books, they're there for a reason. And the reason why we have a wall, it's there for a reason. We need to protect our country because that's something we hold dear. We have walls on our house. We protect our house because that's something we own, we're proud of. We have a fence around our house. So I wish that everybody would be proud of our country and build the wall. And then at the same time, we look at our immigration policies, and if there's flaws, let's look at it and fix them. But currently, I have I wouldn't be here if they were flawed. So there's something good about those policies, because I wouldn't be here and my children wouldn't be here if the policies were flawed.
And I think the biggest argument for legal versus illegal immigration is that with the legal immigration program, the people coming in have some kind of skill that we generally need here in the country, and they are immediately contributing members of society, where allowing millions of people across the border without those skills are draining the country instead of contributing and building it. And like you had said, assimilation is very important, and it seems like a lot of people don't believe that we have the capacity to assimilate all of these illegal immigrants in the time that they're coming over, in the short time frame.
Yeah, and I will say one thing. When my dad came here, when my grandparents came here, they didn't have a skill that the country wanted, but they had someone here that would help them get to there. So it wasn't a, hey, we're letting you in and you have nothing here. It was, who do you know here? How are you going to take care of yourself? You weren't going to go on to a government payroll where you were going to get paid. It was, hey, you're going to have to provide for yourself. You're going to be in this country, and who do you know here that's going to help you? And so that was kind of how they got in. And so I agree that we need skilled, but at the same time, if you're coming here and you don't have the skill, do you have someone here that's going to help you achieve that next level?
So you don't have to go on public assistance.
Public.
Because I saw on your website that you were saying that here in California, illegal immigrants are entitled to $300 per week in unemployment, so that's roughly $1,200 a month, plus $38.74 in federal aid, and also Social Security.
Right. So, I mean, they're just drawing on our system, and the old system that allowed me to exist here is one where you didn't get any of that aid, and our country was flourishing. So that's something that, we could go back to. Regarding the 150, so the 150,000, so it really strikes a nerve when it comes to that bill, and the reason why is because I'm not familiar with all of the rules in California, but Newsom vetoed it, and I know in the federal law when they veto it, it could go back to the process and get enough votes so it passes without a supermajority and no veto. My concern is we're going to give. So that bill, if you recall the bill, it says for any illegal immigrant that comes in the country and they would like to buy a house, we will give you up to $150,000 for a down payment. So what's upsetting about that, they're using taxpayer money. They could call it a bond or whatever. Those bonds get funded by taxpayer money. I mean, everything is all about wording and the way it's presented, but at the end of the day, it's taxpayers paying $150,000 for illegal immigrants. What's most upsetting about that is there's so many people who can't afford to put a down payment on a house that their tax dollars are going to go to somebody to pay for it. So they're contributing to society. They have a job. They're working. I don't know if they have a family. They're just contributing to society, and we're going to take their tax money and give it to somebody who's just came in and say, okay, here you go. Here's $150,000. So, I mean, it's just a smack in the face, and I don't understand when people start to wake up and say, okay, I know this is the party I want to be in, but they're killing me. And I don't know when that turns or when that flips and how we get that out there so that they understand, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but my money is going all to I'm barely making ends meet, but my taxes are going for somebody else to buy a house, and I can't buy a house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary that the system has been built so well that it's fooling people out of their own money. So.
And let's stick on that issue, which is making ends meet and cost of living. I saw that on your site. You said that in 2023, 700,000 Californians left the state. I'm guessing that you believe a lot of the reason behind that was because the cost of living is so high in California. And then the question, of course, is what's causing the cost of living to go up, and how do we address that? And I know that's vague, but I'll let you kind of, take off however you would like.
They're leaving, because of our policies and because of cost of living. Policies we know, we've talked about the mega majority. Now the cost of living. The number one cost of living is going to be energy. I don't know why we closed down San Clemente nuclear plant, but they closed it down. There was safety issues, but there's always a chance to, get in there and build another one and build it the same. If you look at France, all of their power comes from nuclear. That's why it's very cheap, and they're able to provide all these social services. That's not something I'm encouraging. I'm saying that the nuclear is ultimately the best way to lower our cost in energy for our homes.
And it frees up capital for other areas.
Exactly. It frees up capital for other, and then we have energy as far as gas. The other part is you and I are paying $1 more per gallon just to buy gas in California. It's ridiculous. The gas tax, I hate to go back to this, but if you go back to France, they had, I don't know if you recall the Yellow Vest riots. The reason why they had the Yellow Vest riots, and this was back in 16 or 17, I'm not sure, is because they were going to give it a gas tax. This socialist country fought so hard and had riots and everywhere because they didn't want the gas tax. And then the next year, California passes the gas tax. I'm like, how does that happen? How does this socialist country fight the gas tax? And then we're in California and we're capitalists, and we're encouraging, we're paying for this gas tax? It didn't make sense to me. The other issue is we need to, open up more drilling and more access to fossil fuels. At the end of the day, we want to be independent, and the way we become independent is we have a refinery in Carson, but we also, we need to have more access to fossil fuels.
Sure, and that would be more of a federal issue, opening things like the Keystone Pipeline and drilling in Anwar and things like that. But
I'm saying in California, and even off the shore.
Okay, got it. I don't know if those require federal licenses, if that's handled by the federal government since it's offshore.
I'll have to look
Probably.
into that. You're probably right.
Yeah, but what I do want to focus more on, which you brought up, are the energy policy in general. And one thing that California has pushed very hard on are green tech mandates, whether it's appliances, moving all of our vehicles to electric battery vehicles. What's your general stance on trying to balance protecting the environment with all of these green tech mandates and the cost of energy?
So there was a book out by Michael Schellenberg, which I'm pretty sure you know, Climate Change and Never, and it was kind of he was talking about his daughter came home and was just panicking because the earth is going to end in 10 years, and what are we going to do, Daddy? What are we going to do? And he kind of went into everything, and he says, ultimately, if you want to get greener, just everybody has to consciously make a decision to go one step further. So if you have a diesel car, go to gas. If you have a gas car, maybe consider hybrid. If you have a hybrid, consider electrical. I mean, those are natural events and would actually be good for the climate. And it's at the people's level. But getting rid of fossil fuels, I think even Elon Musk said that we're not even ready for that because we don't have the structure or infrastructure for it. One thing I will say is when it comes to electrical, I'll never forget this in 1980, I was like 87, and my dad, a friend of his drove over with an electrical car, and he said, he's like, oh, this is fun, it's got great power and everything, and he leaves, and my dad goes, I'll never get an electrical car. I said, why? He goes, because like a light switch, the government can turn it off. And I said, that's a good point. I said, so it was very, very interesting, and I'm like, so I realized like more and more where my freedoms come from is there's little bits and pieces that come to mind when I'm growing up and how my dad was. And my dad was an entrepreneur, self-employed, had 8 kids, married for, they'd still be married, but when they passed, he was 55 years married. So we grew up in a Catholic family in Norwalk, and we were in a 1,200 square foot house, boys' room, girls' room, and parents' room. So it was close quarters, and we look at the cost of living then versus what we have now and what energy was and the cost at that time. It all, back then, if my dad did what he did then, he couldn't do it now.
Exactly, and that's one of the areas where the older generation I have pushed back on in the past because they say, oh, just work hard. These kids now, they're lazy. but they also don't understand that the ratio of the cost of a house to the average salary now is 10 or 12x in certain areas
Right.
here, where it used to be a multiple of 2 or 3. And so it sounds like energy is one of the areas where you believe we can lower the cost of
Right.
living because that effectively brings everything down because transportation
Everything.
relies on it.
Yes.
And what about regulations and then spending on government programs? Because those are the other two areas. What are your takes on regulations, which does tie into energy policy?
Yes, so I'm not a big regulations person. I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody's doing something that's going to hurt individuals, that company's not going to exist. And we kind of saw that if we go back in time before regulation, a lot of the times the legal system would protect the consumer. So regulations there's some regulations that could be good, and I can't think of anything right now because I'm more of a deregulation guy.
Sure.
And so, but I just see as regulations as more taxes. It's just another way to get another hand into your pocket. And these regulations, because it's going to cost you to do this regulation. It's going to cost you. I mean, when we look at the Dobbs-Franks regulation that was put through, all the small banks left. The little banks left because regulation burdens were so, it just was hard to do. And then they put a buffer on it. But by the time they put the buffer on, people had already been gone. And that's usually what happens with regulations. It's just. I'm not for regulations.
Sure. Do you think there should be some kind of base level of regulation, though? For example, on food supply, making sure that it's safe, water, and even certain environmental things, not allowing mass pollution by vehicles.
Yes, I mean that's. I think
because clearly you think California's gone too far.
We're way far on that side. But I mean, just in the basics, yes, we need to protect our food. We need to, pollution, absolutely, dumping, water, safety. When we look at food, we need to look at the sugar that we put in our food. We use, I think, corn fructose syrup, and everywhere else in the world, they use regular cane sugar. Yeah. And it's just, that's something that I would be for because it's for the benefit of the consumer, and at the end of the day, you're going to live longer, and it's going to make your life better.
I will say that does push into a little bit of a slippery slope, though,
yes.
Which is where do we stop that slide? Because, for example, with this particular issue with food, I know that California recently banned one of the dyes in food color. I just remember telling my daughter about it, and I said, "Yeah, there's no more Cheetos, no more of those hot Cheetos."
Yes.
And she was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And but however, I do see the other side of it, where when consumers find out that dyes and different chemicals in our food are toxic, it seems like just over the last month or two, especially on Instagram, that's all that's coming up on my feed is toxic this, and parents are switching. And
right.
I've always been very careful with my diet for the last several years and try to not eat processed foods. But then again, it comes back to the private market can seem to drive that
right.
themselves without a government strong hand.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying regulations. The private market could drive it, and the point is having free communication, freedom of speech, and that's why X is so big right now, is because it's not throttling anyone. It's letting you say what you want, and then it gives you the idea of what is out there. So, like you said, the color dye. Individuals are going to go ahead and have the education, go out to determine what they want, and that's why sometimes regulations, we don't need them as much, because when you know and you can do the research and you see what's going on, all of a sudden, like, the consumer could change it, and the consumer says, "Hey, we're not going to buy this anymore because it's killing us."
Sure. Okay, let's go to a couple of more issues that you can't really segue into, but that voters want to know about. One of them is the Second Amendment. And I saw on your website that you said we have among the toughest gun laws in the country, yet we rank 5th of 50 in gun violence in 2023. So I'm guessing, based on your political party, that you're a strong supporter of the Second Amendment.
Yes, I am. So the Second Amendment is not there for hunting. It's to protect yourself, and it's your God-given right to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to the 10 Commandments and, you can't, thou shalt not kill, that's not what it says. It says, thou shalt not murder. And so you have the right to defend yourself. If someone's trying to murder you, you're able to use force to protect yourself. And so the Second Amendment is there for that reason. One thing I will say about the Second Amendment is I think that we need to teach that, the Second Amendment, as much as we focus on the First Amendment. And what also at the same time, gun safety. Because gun safety is the most important. There's a lot of negligent discharges and a lot of deaths that happen because of not understanding how a gun works and, just basic understanding of a gun. And so for me, the Second Amendment is very important, and the reason why we have the first is because of the second. And that is to ensure we keep the first. As far as gun violence, it's not the gun, it's the human. And we need to focus on the people that we have and the humans that we have and making them better. I know probably the next question we're gonna go into is probably abortion. And
we'll get to that in a second. I'm
okay,
going to stick on the nuances of guns for another minute.
So I believe that you have the right to bear arms.
Sure. Then one place I always push back on very strong Second Amendment supporters are, what about red flag laws? Because you just sort of said that it's the person, and some people do have mental health problems. They're a danger to themselves and to others. We've seen this with some of the school shootings. We saw this with the Trump assassins, for example. So, and a lot of these people do come up on the radar of either local law enforcement or federal law enforcement as being potentially problematic. So is there something that the government should do to monitor these people? And then I know it's a very slippery slope with constitutionality.
It's very slippery. And so I guess I have my biggest concern is we have a lot of veterans that come back, and they have post-traumatic, or they have a stress disorder. And so they could be qualified as not being able to hold a gun. They're serving our country across in foreign land carrying a gun. I'm not worried about them. That's one. Number two is, there is always exceptions, but the majority, there is always exceptions. And the only way you can guarantee that you're safe is if you're armed. Because at the end of the day, the red flag laws, my concern about red flag laws is, hey, I'm going through a divorce. Mario's crazy. You need to take away all his guns. And that's not the case. I don't want that call of if someone's going through a divorce and their wife or someone's coming after them and trying to take their gun. Ultimately, if everybody understood the importance of the Second Amendment and was able to constitutionally carry, red flag laws aren't a problem, because guess what? You're going to be able to defend yourself. So yes, it's a slippery slope, and I would have to look into that to get into the red flag laws. But ultimately, if you have the means to protect yourself, the red flag laws doesn't really need to exist. It may come off where you're going to have issues, but you're going to be there to defend yourself at the same time. So you're going to have like force for like force. Ultimately, that's where I stand on the red flags. I'd have to look into more and see what we want to do on red flags, if there was something there. But if everybody's carrying and everybody's comfortable with the gun and everybody has gun safety, you have a more polite society. All of a sudden, there's not this road rage and everything because they're like, oh, shoot, it's a polite society. You understand that this person's having a bad day. I'm going to let it go. Not a big deal, because everybody's at the same level. Yeah. And so if we got to that point where you had individuals who understood gun safety, gun training, proper training, it should take care of itself.
What about certain storage laws? Because I believe there was a bill that was just passed within the last month tightening up the safe storage laws with guns. I can't remember exactly what the legislation was, but I read some opinions on it, and it seems like, say you bring your firearm home and you set it on your credenza when you walk in the door, and then you go out to check your mail. If it's unsecured and there's somebody in the house, that isn't well trained, I couldn't remember exactly what the verbiage was, that you could potentially be held criminally liable for leaving your gun effectively unlocked.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the government trying to control everything.
Too far.
Too far.
Okay.
Funny story, when I was, first got my first gun, my wife was absolutely against it. My kids were 5 and 3, or 5 and 2, and absolutely against it. And we were in Palm Springs, and we're at the pool, and talking to a young lady, and my wife goes, "What do you do?" She goes, "I'm a police officer." She goes, "Okay, talk to my husband. He doesn't need a gun." And she looked at her and said,
I'm surprised she said, "Talk to your husband."
Yeah. She said, she says, "I want you to know, you need a gun. You need a gun, your husband needs a gun." She goes, "Because I'm not worried about you two. You are good people. I could tell talking with you, I know you're good people." She goes, "But I will tell you this. You'll keep that gun secured. But at the same time, when your son's asked to see that, you check the gun, make sure it's safe, let them see it. Take the mystery away." She goes, "Because you need to let them, tell them the safety, treat them safety on it, everything, but at the same time, keep it locked away. When they ask to see it, you say, this is a tool, it's for a specific tool." And that was probably the best advice I got, because my son's now 20, and he looked at me and he says, "How did you make us not want to ever touch your guns?" I said, "Because," and I tell him this, what happened. He goes, "Because he goes, I don't even care that you have a gun." He goes, "And I don't care to touch it." And so it was it was a very good event.
Yeah, it's interesting psychology, and generally it makes sense. Kids want what they know they're not supposed to have.
Yes.
And so if you let them have it carefully, safe environment, then the novelty wears off.
Yeah, it was, I think he asked for it like 3 times, and that was it.
Sure.
After that, never asked for it again.
Okay.
So it's just, so that's, when you talk about that law, I think it's overreaching, because I know that if I left anything, I did another test on my son, and this time he was in high school, and this was probably about 5 years ago. And then my coworker.
Sounds like he was a great guinea pig.
Yeah, well, this is my younger one, not the older one. I did it with the younger one.
Got it.
So my coworker was like, "Oh, guns are horrible, blah, blah." We were talking about guns, and I said, "No," I said, "They're fine." I said, "My kids are fine. They don't care." He goes, "Well, do a test for me." He goes, leave your gun on your son's desk and see what he does." And so I cleared out the gun, made sure everything was fine, put it on his desk. He walks into his room, and he sees it from his door. He goes, "Why is your gun out? Why is it on my desk?" Like, he didn't want anything to do with it. So it was just, went back to work. I'm like, "No, my son's fine. They understand it's a tool." Mm-hmm. And they understood that it should be out only for when you have a reason. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, fair enough.
So when it comes to that law, I think that's overreaching, and to say that, you're assuming that every family is the same and doesn't understand guns. So
okay. So leave it up to the parents then.
Exactly. Everything is, ultimately, parents know what's best. Okay. They're with them the most. I know the teachers will say, "Oh, we'll rate them all day." But at the end of the day, the parents gave birth to them, raised them. They know what the kids, how they think. My 2 sons are night and day. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure if you have 2 kids, they're completely different. I don't even know how they're the same children. So leave it up to the parents.
And now going to the issue that you were foreshadowing on, which is abortion. California's current law is you're allowed to terminate up until viability, which is approximately 27 weeks, and then thereafter only for exceptions for the health or life of the mother or the child, I believe. I was going through some of your materials. You're pro-life. However, you wrote that there are exceptions to consider, such as the typical ones, and I don't want to say the certain word because we'll get cut off of YouTube if we do.
Okay.
So just in general, go ahead and talk about your stance on this issue.
So I am pro-life, and as I mentioned before, my son was born at 805 grams. Mm-hmm. So I was at work. My wife called. I got a call from the doctor saying, "Hey, you need to get to the hospital right now." So my wife, we weren't expecting my son. He was 31 weeks. He's measuring 27 weeks, so he's really small. And
This
I
is
get
like
there.
6 months, basically.
Yeah, I get there and the doctor says, okay, your baby's killing your wife. I said, okay, so what do we do? They said, we're monitoring your wife because we're going to try to save your wife and the baby. So it was a long 12 hours, and then finally my wife and they were like, we got to take him out. So we took him out, and he came out breathing, and they were just like, what the heck is up with this kid? He was 805 grams. He scored high on that test right when they come out, when they scream, and and they're just like, what is going on with this kid? And
gosh, must have been because your father or grandfather was raised in Compton, like
yeah,
right? He's got those genes,
yes,
those fighter genes.
he got those fighting genes. So he came out, and my wife had to stay in the hospital for a week, get back to normal because her everything was just going crazy because of the pregnancy, and my son was there for 2 months, and at that point. You look at that and you're like, okay, is there really an exception with today's technology? Do you really need an exception for the mother's life? Because they did a pretty fine job with my son. And I understand that, you're running that fine line and you may lose the baby, but that's through natural course, for the mother's safety. But with today's technology, they're really, those exceptions are kind of, you don't need them anymore. But at the same time, we have California law on the 27 weeks. A coworker of mine, his wife or his girlfriend was pregnant, and he's in his 30s, mid 30s, and she was 27 weeks, and they got an abortion. And I prayed for that guy. I talked to him. I said, hey, I mean, you're not a spring chicken. He's like, no, my parents will be so upset. And I said, can you do me a favor? Could you call your parents? You're the only child. They want a grandchild. I guarantee it. Every parent wants a grandchild. Could you call him and just talk to him? And he wouldn't. So, and the procedure got pushed back. And I'm pretty sure he was over the 27-week when it got done. And I don't know how they got around it. And it breaks my heart because this was not more than 6 months ago. And or maybe a little bit more, but I just was like, come on, there's a life there. And when I look at my son at 805 grams, when he was born, his head was the size of a tennis ball. His body was 11 inches. Yeah. And it's amazing. And I went and saw him the first time after, and the nurse goes, you're in for a handful. I go, what do you mean? She goes, we drugged your wife to calm her down. This guy has not stopped moving in here, and it got into his system, and he's just going crazy. You're in for a handful. And sure enough, he's a handful. So,
that's good, but he's doing great now.
Oh, yeah, he's great. He's senior in high school, does great, and he plays competitive soccer, and he loves it. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, I appreciate that this is a difficult issue, as well as Second Amendment. These are probably the two most divisive issues between the parties, and there's no great answer. But I will say that in California, the legislation regarding this isn't going to change anytime soon.
Oh, no, and I will say, I mean, even if you're looking at, that he's pro-life, I can't vote for him. You know what? There is a number of things that are impacting your children more than this. And you won't even recognize your children at the end if you don't put somebody in there to put checks and balances, and all the laws and everything that's going through in California. You need to really consider that. And as you mentioned, I am pro-life, but the chances of me changing that if I got in, it's slim to none.
Yeah.
And so that's, and like you said,
I'm guessing you would argue that your pro-life stance is just illustrative of how much you value kids and life, and to make sure that whatever is done is best for them.
Exactly, and at the end of the day, I mean, we come down to when when they say, hey, I'm pro-life because it's not a woman's health, it's the body inside of that body. I want to defend that body. We need to protect that individual, and that's why I'm pro-life.
Okay. So then just wrapping up, I know that your district is typically very Democrat. The election results are usually somewhere around 70-30. I believe in your primary was 68-32. That's a very big gap to overcome. I know the left will always try to paint the Republican candidate as crazy, right-wing, extremist, MAGA. And a lot of times the right-wing candidate will try to paint the left as communist, socialist, Democrat. So in reality, and that's one of the reasons why I'm hosting this podcast, trying to let people see that everyone are just regular people. They often have very nuanced views that are in between those two extremes.
Right.
And to pick the candidate who you believe will do the right thing and you believe has the best policies that match up with what's important to you. So in order to pull enough votes for you to come even close to your incumbent opponent, you have to pull a lot of independents and Democrats.
Right.
So what would you say to them in this election as to why they should come over to your side instead of continuing to give their vote to Lena Gonzalez?
So I kind of pointed that out before, is if you're better off from the last 4 years, then vote for her. But if you're not, consider me. And at the end of the day, I care about your children. I just want, I want to have a society that grows. And in order to do that, we need to educate our children. And the education system, we need to focus on how we're going to get there and what we're going to do for how we're teaching them. And English, writing, reading, math, those are the core that we need. And we need to focus on that and kind of think about what I'm saying when I say, hey, a police officer cannot talk about politics. Why is a teacher who has a brain that's a sponge talking about stuff that's inappropriate for children? And some items don't even, you talk at home and address. And so my concern is, hey, let's look at that. And at the end of the day, if we need, I care about our children. I don't want biological men in girls' bathrooms. I'm pretty sure the majority of the people would agree with that. There's options. If there's somebody who's in between, there's individual stalls. They don't need to be in the general public.
Other accommodations
could be made.
Okay.
And that's the concern. And I understand that, there may be issues with that, but there's accommodations that can be made so that we're not forcing something on innocent children that are like, what the heck is going on? And they don't understand it, don't comprehend it. And that's something.
So education, back to academics, parental rights, making sure that the parents are in charge of their children.
Right, and that's ultimately what I want, is I want parents in charge of their children, because you know what's best for them. You're around them. And guess what? There's going to be good parents and bad parents, but the majority want the best for their kids. And I would say it's close to 95% want the best for their kids. And that's what and there's always those outliers. But at the end of the day, you know what's best for your child, and that's what I would encourage them. The other issue is if you look at the voting record, and it's available on the Secretary of State for California, you could go down, and I encourage you not to read the bill name, but to read the bill, because the bill names sound wonderful. I mean, they have one where it's talking about a child's right to read, and what it is it's putting, sexual content books in the library. I never had a problem going into the library and grabbing a book. Now they made that available. And growing up, that type of content was behind the counter. It was kind of a shaming when you were younger to go behind it and stand behind the counter. You knew it. They're like, wow, what's up with this guy? And now we're just trying to make it open and free. And I think that a lot of the parents, if you care about your children, that's what I'm concerned about. At the end of the day, education is going to save our country, and that's what we need. And at the end of the day, I'm a Catholic at the same time, and Christian, and so I follow the Bible as well. So I like to consider myself in the middle. I think some of the things that people will consider that I'm crazy is because I'm pro-life. But at the end of the day, that's a hot topic, and it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Democrats are pro-life too, and they understand it.
Yeah.
So it's a yes and no. It's not a gray area, and that's kind of where we're at. And the gray area is the exceptions that I address on the website.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think that this year that issue is not at the top of people's list. They're caring more about illegal immigration, the cost of living, and some of the other education and parental rights issues we talked about.
Yeah, energy needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Energy and water storage in California. We need to. I mean, there's no reason why we should have a drought when we have the Sierras.
Yeah.
So we are, and they have. I think the last 3 years have been a crazy amount of snowpack, and it's just running right out into the ocean. We're not capturing it. So that's another. I mean, another concern is getting that water.
Yeah,
So.
I'm glad you're versed on that. We won't go into that, but yeah, other candidates in the more agriculture areas, I do address that issue with them.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you care about that because it does affect the entire state.
Oh yeah, it impacts every one of us.
Sure.
So.
Well, I appreciate you showing up. You were my very first interview with my, I guess, mobile podcast set now that I've set up here in this beautiful studio in downtown LA. And thank you for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joe. This is my first time doing a podcast, so I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Hopefully many more to come in the future, not just with you, but lots of other candidates.
Excellent.
I have 6 more lined up for the weekend.
Well, good luck.
Great. Thank you.